The Pittsburgh Penguins signed a few players on Tuesday, including one that could be on the team full-time for next season.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at @SynonymForWet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed. And that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. So getting into the meat of today's episode, Kyle Dubas had himself a very busy Tuesday. He saw what the Tampa Bay Lightning did after reacquiring Ryan McDonagh from the Nashville Predators. And as Skip Bayless once said on Undisputed a few years ago, it's my turn. That's what Kyle Dubas basically said when he made these three signings on Tuesday. And we'll start with the first one, signing Jack St. Ivany to a 3-year deal worth $775,000 per year. It is a two-way contract. Actually, all three of these deals that Dubas signed are two-way contracts overall. But you might be the president of the Jeff Carter fan club. In fact, I know you are. Well, I am the president of the Jack St. Ivany fan club. I am a big fan of this player heading into next season. And yes, I understand. It was a 14-game sample size. He only had 1 point in those 14 games. But you got to look beyond the counting stats to really break down this player. When I was watching him down the stretch of this season, I saw someone who looked really poised. I saw someone who looked very well seasoned, especially in his own zone. And he reminds me of a younger version of Chad Ruhwedel. I had some people on my mentions on Twitter on Tuesday saying that that's a bad thing. And I really don't understand why. Ruhwedel gets too much flack from some people in the fan base, even though I feel like he did a really sound job for the Penguins overall. And I think St. Ivany can grow into that type of player, but maybe one that brings a little bit more offense compared to Ruhwedel. Some of his underlyings are better than others, but I saw someone who, when the puck was on his stick in the offensive zone, he was creating a little bit of offense, but it was his play in the defensive zone that really stood out to me. He was taking one-on-ones like it was nothing, winning those battles pretty easily, skating the puck out of danger, and then getting the rush going for the Penguins. And I remember when he first came up, I really didn't think that much of him, just because you look at the history of some of these other Wilkes-Barre call-ups and they really weren't doing too much throughout the season, maybe outside of Valtteri Pustin. But St. Ivany quickly became arguably the team's best call-up from Wilkes-Barre during the season. I think it's him and Puustinen at the top for me, in my opinion. And if he goes on to have a great camp and a great preseason, he should 100% be on this team to start the year. And I think this deal could look like quite a steal for the Penguins if he pans out. I'm a big fan of this player.
I completely agree with you, and I'm right with you. I have liked this player since he came up. He really impressed, and you may have touched on it, but if not, we'll say it again for the millionth time on this podcast. If you're the sixth defenseman on an NHL team, your best asset is not being noticed, is you play a very solid game that doesn't do anything flashy, it doesn't stand out, but it gets the job done. But you likened him to Chad Ruhwedel, and again, I know 14-game sample size, hard to garner a whole lot from that, especially in a season where there were so many other issues with this team. But you likened him to Chad Ruhwedel. I see a guy who could potentially grow into this team's next Brian Dumoulin. A lot of similarities between the two of them. You know, when you look at the way they measure out, he's 6'3", Dumoulin 6'4". They both hover around 200 pounds. But then I watch the way St. Ivany plays the game. A lot of what you said, you expand upon that. The way he plays one-on-ones, plays the angle, perfectly. Keeps the guy to the outside, keeps him to the outside of the high danger areas. His stick work is pretty darn good into where that he's going to force whoever is coming down on him in a one-on-one situation to have to go to the low percentage play rather than give them some sort of A plus pass or path to the net. And he's not overly physical, but he's selectively physical. He knows when the situation calls to throw a check or to angle a guy off. And a lot of that is what we saw when Brian Dumoulin started to come up and develop into what he became for the Penguins. Now, I will say this is putting the cart a little bit ahead of the horse here because, again, 14 games, but he's still only 24 years old, a lot of room to grow. We'll see how he responds to potentially, and in my opinion, he should make the team full-time out of camp, and how he deals with the grind of an NHL season, because it's a lot easier to ride that momentum and that adrenaline of getting the call up, staying on the roster, and making a name for yourself rather than, okay, you're here. How do you stay here?
Right. And I think one of the other reasons I'm so bullish on him overall is just because of the way he played when the games became that much more important for the Penguins down the stretch. He was going up against some of the best players in the world in those games just because the Penguins schedule was really nasty to end the season, but he didn't look out of place at all. And yes, I understand it's a 14 game sample size. I'm not trying to overreact to it and be like some other people that you see with some of the other players that have come up from Wilkes-Barre, but he stood out in ways that those other players in Wilkes-Barre outside of Puustinen did not. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really bullish on him heading into the season. He's also, again, very cheap, $775,000 per season when you look at the salary cap. So they're really, at least right now, with the way he ended the season, there's no need to do what the Penguins did a couple of years ago. Remember when they had Ruhwedel ready to go and they signed Jan Rutta to a multi-year contract. I don't think Kyle Dubas needs to do something like that in free agency this summer. I know he wasn't the GM at the time, but my point still stands.
They do still have to figure something out on the blue line. You have a pretty big hole considering the disappointing, and that's putting it mildly, season for Ryan Graves. You do want to see him bounce back, but you do still feel like this blue line is a piece or two away from being very solid. I don't think St. Ivany solves that, but he gives you a very solid depth option on the blue line. I think if he continues to trend the way he was to end the year, you've got somebody who you can pretty much guarantee could take up residence on the third pairing, and then you got to figure out your top four from there. But overall, I like this signing a lot, and I think it answers a lot of questions that we had going into this offseason about the blue line.
Agreed. The biggest question for me about the blue line is, what does the left side look like for next season? I mean, you all know Marcus Pettersson is going to be there, but P.O. Joseph is an RFA right now. Does he come back? Ryan Graves, it's expected that he comes back, but how does he play in year two of that long-term contract? I mean, I've said on the show a lot that I still think they could use another top four guy for this defensive group, but will they have the money? Will they have the wiggle room to maneuver that? That's going to be the big question. So the left side, that's the one I have questions about, not really too much about the right. And as for St. Ivany's partner, it could be Graves if he starts the season on the third pairing, but it also could be Ryan Shea. But the thing is, the Penguins will have to re-sign him since he's expected to hit the market on July 1. And those two, they only played 9 games together during the season, about 88 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time. And most of the underlying numbers were pretty solid. Yeah, their Corsi for rate, 41%, not that good, but 4 goals for, 2 goals against, 51.7% expected goals for rate, 52% scoring chances for rate. He's right around 50% for high danger chances for, same thing for high danger goals for, those two together. So it was a pairing that definitely worked a bit down the stretch, but the big question will be, do the Penguins want to bring Ryan Shea back on July 1?
And I don't think it would be the worst idea to get Ryan Shea back. Only made $775K last year. Wouldn't say he's in line for any sort of a big payday or pricing himself out of Pittsburgh. And again, something I've been saying on this episode a lot is it would just be another good depth option for the blue line because, like you said, they weren't the best pairing. But again, third pairing, you don't need them to light the world on fire. You don't need them to be the best thing in the world, but they did show some chemistry together. They had a very solid performance together. And it feels like if you give them a bit of a bigger opportunity, or at the very least more games together, that they could be a productive bottom pair. And of course, continues to give you options on the blue line, a little bit more depth, whether there's injuries or certain guys don't work out, whatever may come during the length of an NHL season. He's a good depth option to keep around. Not overly impressive, but a guy I would certainly not be upset if they brought back.
Yeah, if Shea and, say, John Ludwig are your number 7 or number 8 defenseman, I'll take that as long as you make, other changes, I would say, to your left side, or at least try and bring in maybe another top 4 guy. But that's, again, a different discussion for a different day. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to discuss the other 2 signings that Dubas made on Tuesday and give our thoughts on those 2 players heading into the 2024-2025 season. But before we get to that, we have to tell you about our first sponsor, which is Indeed. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. It is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job websites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. We streamline hiring with powerful tools that help you find match candidates, and with Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed Data US. It does the hard work for you. Indeed shows you candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your description immediately after you post so you can hire faster. Indeed's hiring platform also matches you with quality candidates instantly. And even better, Indeed's the only job website where you can pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer is good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit right now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Again, that's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So let's get into the re-signing of Jonathan Gruden. He has played 16 total games for the Penguins at the NHL level. 1 goal, only 1 point in those 16 games. He played in 13 this year for the Penguins, 3 last year. But in Wilkes-Barre, he was one of their better players in 47 games, 13 goals, 24 points during that time. I don't really see him in this team's lineup for next season. I kind of see him right now as a 13th, 14th forward. The only way I see him in the lineup to start the season, 2 things. A, they didn't do enough during free agency or via trade to get better players for the bottom 6. Or B, he just blows everyone away at training camp in the preseason, myself included. But I think both of those scenarios are highly unlikely. He's just a good depth player to have in the organization. He can be called up whenever. So I'm not, how do I want to say it? I don't think he's going to be on the team next year, but there's no reason to not make this signing.
Yeah, it's a whatever signing to me. He's we're going to kind of say this about everybody at this point outside of St. Ivany. It's a depth option. I'm in complete agreement with you in the fact that the only way he makes this team out of training camp is if he has an all-world camp. And I don't want to say that I think it's impossible because he is only 24. He's shown some talent at the AHL level. And there's always 1 or 2 guys every year that kind of come out of nowhere. You don't expect to see them. You're not talking about them. And then all of a sudden they're lighting camp up. But at the same time, it's another guy who has some solid numbers at the AHL level. He can be a piece that you use when injuries inevitably happen throughout the course of a season. and you need somebody for 4 or 5 games that isn't going to come in and become a staple in the lineup, but is definitely not going to be out of place. And we've seen that with Gruden for the last couple of years. He's fine enough when he gets called up. He's not going to be a guy that you're going to go, oh, he's really making a name for himself. He's going to stick up here. But you look at him and go, with this guy, that guy out of the lineup, he filled in fine enough.
Yeah, it's your typical 13, 14, 15 forward signing. And to be fully transparent, 2-year deal, $775,000 per year. And as I said earlier in the show, also a 2-way contract for Gruden. But moving on to the final signing that Dubas made on Tuesday, it's someone that he knows quite well coming from outside the organization. He signed defenseman Philip Kral to a 1-year contract. Now, Kral, he was the Maple Leafs' 5th-round pick in the 2018 NHL draft. So Dubas was there when he drafted him. He's out of the Czech Republic, but he did spend this entire 2023-2024 season in La Liga over in Finland, had 5 goals, 37 points in 46 games. And in the playoffs for his league, he played in 17 games, 1 goal, 8 points in those games. He has played all over these last few years. I mean, he's played for the Toronto Marlies, especially in the 2022-2023 season, had 2 goals, 6 points in 24 games. He's also played for other teams in the Czech Republic. So this is a player that I think is at least some added depth defensively to the Penguins organization. I don't think he's going to be making this team out of camp or anything, but it's still someone that I think is going to get some nice minutes in Wilkes-Barre. And if he plays well, I think he could be a call-up option for the Penguins if some injuries arise on the blue line.
Yeah, this feels like a guy who went overseas to kind of get his game right. You can see his AHL career numbers are not overly impressive. 7 goals, 22 assists, 29 points, 2 career NHL games with the Maple Leafs in 2022. But then you look at the way he played in La Liga last year with those 5 goals, 32 assists, and 37 points. And this is a guy who went overseas, played in a little bit lesser of a league, really seems like he's really starting to figure it out. And that the Penguins are going to start putting a lot more emphasis on their minor league system, on development. So this is a guy who could be a bit of a diamond in the rough, could become found money. It's a 1-year deal, so we'll see how he reacts to just being on a 1-year deal, likely just playing in the American Hockey League with maybe some call-up time. But overall, this is a good signing by Dubas just because it's completely low risk, total high reward. You see what you get out of him. You see what you get from him after doing well in Finland. So nice little piece of business here to at the very least add some organizational depth.
Agreed. And I watched some very limited film of him before we started recording. His shot really doesn't blow you away, but he walks the blue line really well, defends his own zone pretty efficiently from the film that I watched, and he is crafty with the puck on his stick. So I'm excited to see what he can do in the Penguin system. But I think that'll do it for this second segment. Let us know what you think about these signings down in the comments on YouTube. You can also send us a DM on social media as well. Do you think Kyle Dubas did a good job with these 3 signings? But again, that'll do it for this segment. Coming up to end the show, 15 years ago on Tuesday, I can't even believe it's been that long, Evgeni Malkin had a game to remember in Game 2 of the 2009 Eastern Conference Final against the Carolina Hurricanes. Pat and I are going to reminisce on that right after this. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So can you believe it's been 15 years since Evgeni Malkin's crazy hat trick against the Carolina Hurricanes? This happened in 2009 when I was Chex Notes 11. I am now 26 years old, going to be 27 this year. And I just can't believe it's been that long. But when I think about that game, I think about someone who was a man possessed in Evgeni Malkin, someone who was not going to let the Penguins lose that game. He went to the net every chance he could. And I hope this is not a hot take to anyone when I say this. Evgeni Malkin was the best player in the world during that series, and especially during that run. I know Sidney Crosby was obviously tremendous throughout that playoff run for the Penguins, but Evgeni Malkin was the best player in hockey throughout that 2-month stretch, and nobody could ever take the puck off his stick when he jumped onto the ice. The spinorama goal with Dennis Seidenberg on his back just will forever live in my head. I went crazy when I saw it live. I still get chills going down my spine when I hear the call from Joe Beninati to this day. Seeing his family go crazy in Mellon Arena and just the fans going nuts as well. Just an awesome memory. What a game overall as well. And my God, I miss Mellon Arena quite a bit.
Dude, me too. And I'm sure I've said this on podcasts before, maybe not here on Locked On. I might have talked about it on Dying Alive back in the day. But, I didn't see that goal live. I saw that goal the morning after because that was my senior prom.
Oh,
so I did not get to watch that game live. I was on the Gateway Clipper fleet floating down the river in a tuxedo with all of my high school friends. And I was running back and forth from whether it was our table or the dance floor to one of my favorite high school teachers, who was also a gigantic Penguins fan, nudging him and saying, "What's the update? What's the score? What's going on? What's happening?" So I did not get to see that game or that goal live because I was celebrating senior prom. But overall, I mean, you're right on the money, man. From about the halfway point of the Capitals series until the Penguins lifted the Stanley Cup at the Joe Louis Arena in Game 7 against Detroit, there was not a better player on the planet than Evgeni Malkin. He owned the puck every time he had it. There was no getting it off of him. He owned the front of the net. Everybody remembers the spinorama goal, and rightfully so. They should, because it was a marvelous goal that at the time we had never seen anything like it. But you watch his first two goals, he just was bull in a china shop right to the front of the net, and there was not a single defenseman on Carolina who could stop him. He was hands down the best player on the planet. And for some more 6 degrees of separation for that goal, and I know you know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. He wins the faceoff forward before he scores that spinorama behind the net, behind the back goal. Who was the center he beat on Carolina to score the goal?
Formerly team dad, Matt Cullen.
That's right. So, I mean, overall, it's wild to me that it's been 15 years since the Penguins won that Stanley Cup in 2009. And unlike 2016, there was no argument. There was no dispute. The undisputed Conn Smythe winner was Evgeni Malkin.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if he didn't win the Conn Smythe that year, I probably would have rioted. I mean, again, Crosby was tremendous throughout that run, but there were also times where he went cold just a little bit. But Evgeni Malkin, he never went cold during those 2 months. And that was vintage Geno through and through. I call that the Geno game, baby. That's anytime I think about that game, it's the Geno game forever in my head.
And you just had to know after that game, because people kind of forget that game, like despite the Penguins ultimately getting the sweep against the Hurricanes, Game 1 was very tight. The Penguins got the win, but it was not a decisive victory. They snuck out a win.
Game 2 was tight as well. It was very back and forth with plenty of goals being scored, kind of opposite of Game 1 a little bit, but both games I felt like were still fairly tight. I mean, I know the Penguins at the end got an empty net goal, but it was still a tight game.
Yeah, and that after that win, after that goal, I looked at that series and just went, yeah, it's not a matter of if they're winning this series, it's when they're winning this series, because you could tell after that game, the Hurricanes knew that they just had no answer for Evgeni Malkin and the rest of the Penguins. They knew that they were in the series. They knew it was going to be competitive, but you could just tell in their body language, the way they talked to the media after the games, that they kind of knew, hey, this is the end of the road for us. We're overmatched. We're going to give them all we got, but it's probably not going to be enough.
Right. And Carolina played fairly fine in games 3 and 4 down in Raleigh, but the Penguins were just too good that run. And Evgeni Malkin was also great in those 2 games as well. But I felt like that would be fun to reminisce a little bit on to end the show. Do you have anything else to add before we wrap up today?
Just like Joe Beninati said at the end of that game after that hat trick, all hail Evgeni Malkin.
That's a great way to end today's episode, I think. And Pat and I will be back for another episode for you all on Thursday to recap any news that comes from the Penguins, as well as other topics, including our season in review series. Yes, we will continue that on Thursday and on Friday as well. But for Patrick Damp, I am Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this episode, and we'll be back on Thursday.